Hey everyone, Chris here with another filler video. Now, I've said before that I don't typically get the same questions multiple times, and thus it makes it kind of hard to do a sort of FAQ video that talks about them, but that's not completely true. There is one question I've gotten quite a number of times over the years, especially more recently, and it basically comes down to, how do you make games? Well, that's actually quite the loaded question with a number of potential outcomes, so I'm going to do my best to give you all a prep on how to get into game design, if you really want to. And that is the key there, is figuring out if you really want to or not, because if you really don't, you're just going to be wasting a lot of time. Before I begin though, I feel I should preface this with a bit of a disclaimer. The thing is, only a fraction of independent game developers achieve a measure of success. And I've spoken to people more talented at game design than I am who've decided to give it up and go into other things, simply because it is very hard to make livable money from game design as an indie developer. Me personally, I am not successful at it. I have the talent for sure. In fact, the game you're seeing in the background right now is the third game I ever wrote in C++ over a decade ago. And it's also the game my website was originally named after, Pixelmusement. The thing is, talent does not equal success. And so while I do have a good understanding of the topics I'm about to talk about, remember that you're listening to someone who's still trying to find their place and could be at it for a great deal longer, depending on how well I'm able to fit my game design efforts into running a near-weekly web series, which is a part of the reason why I take breaks from the show. So anyways, let's talk about getting into the world of game design. Now, the first question I always ask people who are wondering about this is, how old are you? Because a lot like learning languages, the younger you are, the easier it'll be to grasp the concepts behind creating games. Not to mention the easier it'll be to learn all the other intricacies of computers that you'll need to know, since you need to be sure that what you create will actually run the way you want it to on the plethora of hardware and operating systems out there. Now, this isn't to say that it's impossible to learn game design as an older person, just be aware that the older you are, the more the odds will be stacked against you that you'll make any sort of progress. Which kind of leads into the next question I always ask people. Do you want to get into game design just to have fun, or are you looking to make a career out of it? If all you want to do is make games just for the heck of it, then yeah, go nuts. You don't need me or anyone else to tell you how to do it. Just go grab yourself a copy of Game Maker on Steam or something and just fiddle around with the thing. Because really, if you want to have fun with the process, then there's nothing I can tell you that will change the way you go about doing stuff. In fact, even if you want to make a career out of it, you may just want to try tinkering with game creation systems a little anyways, just to see what you're getting yourself into. So yeah, because of that, for the rest of this video, I'm going to assume that you're somebody who wants to make money making games someday. Thus, the next question I always ask people is, have you ever actually made any non-digital games? Things like board games, card games, dice games, etc. Because experience with that kind of stuff is a really good indicator of how well-minded you are to creating a set of rules and definitions out of how a digital game would play out. In fact, a good way to get yourself some rudimentary game design experience is to take an existing non-digital game and come up with your own completely new set of rules for it, using the same pieces that it came with. One of my original non-digital ideas when I was like 7 years old involved turning Scrabble into a turn-based platformer. I am not even kidding. And then the final question I ask people is probably the most critical one of all. Do you actually want to design games, or do you just want to be a part of the game-making process? Now, this is a very important distinction because in the commercial game industry, design positions are incredibly hard to come by, to the point where if you ever want to design your own commercial game, you're pretty much going to have to start your own company. If you just have a particular talent like coding or artwork and just want to contribute that talent to a game rather than design the game itself, then your best course of action is to actually attend college. There's many colleges out there that offer game design courses, and completing such a course will often lead to placement opportunities, or at the very least a diploma that indicates you have the know-how to get into particular junior positions. Now keep in mind that junior positions in the game industry are not very common, but they are there all the same. You just got to be willing to work for just about anyone and be willing to move to the city the position is located in. And chances are, if you want to work for someone else, unless they're an indie startup, you're not doing it from home. Now, if you've passed all 4 of these questions and you want to do game design for a living, then you have a couple ways to go about doing this. But keep in mind that you're pretty much guaranteed not to be an overnight success, and learning design itself is a lifelong process that you will never be perfect at. So the trick is not to reach a particular goal, but to simply become better to the point where you can design something that you feel other people would be willing to pay money for. You become better through experience, so the trick now is to learn everything you can about every aspect of creating a game. Now, on the programming forums I've frequented and continue to frequent, all too often I've seen people come on the forum with no idea what they're doing, asking how to get started making some of the most complex kinds of games imaginable, like MMORPGs or whatnot. Typically, the answer to something like that is, if you have to ask that, then you're doomed. Really, the best kind of games to start with are the simplest things you can think of. Things like number guessing games, rolling dice, memory games. You need to start really simple, because at the same time as you're learning how to do this design work, you're also going to be learning how to program, how to draw, how to work with audio, how to work with graphics files, how the keyboard works, how the mouse works, how to implement timing, how to implement animations, how to work with probability and random chance, or heck, just math in general is a big part of making games. Even for the artists who need to ensure that their graphics fit within certain dimensions or are aligned to certain pixel accuracies. Though this does bring up an interesting point. You don't have to be an expert at any of these things if you can get other people to help you out. A lot of indie startups begin as a single person setting out the call for talented people to help produce a grand idea of sorts, or some indie startups literally begin as a group of friends, none of whom have actually met each other in person, all collaborating online towards a singular goal and sharing in the profits that result. However, you still need a good bit of experience before you can actually lead a team of people. On any game project, the designer is usually the leader, or very close to being the leader, so it's very important that the designer knows what they're doing and what they're asking people to do for them. Because sure, you can design a game with no programming skill if you have another programmer working for you, but then you might ask your programmer to do something impossible and you're going to be stuck trying to understand why they can't do it. Suffice to say, a good designer has at least a little bit of skill with everything they ask someone else to do. This is why it's important to make those small little inconsequential games on your own before you start tackling things like puzzle games and platformers and shooters and stuff, because you really need to understand all the little details so that you can be sure that you're giving your team or yourself realistic goals for getting stuff done. Now, the reason I personally still work solo has nothing to do with an inability to lead people, and everything to do with the fact that I've just never really been able to find anyone as committed to making a game as I am, who's also willing to work for just a share of the profits and nothing in the interim. In fact, as I said before, most independent developers are not successful regardless of how good their games are, so most of them actually still have day jobs and whatnot. Some of them even still live with their parents, and while I didn't used to fall in with that crowd, I kinda do now. But at least I have a medical excuse for that, and it's not just because I'm lazy or something. I think if anything, having made over 150 videos has proven that I'm anything but lazy. The point there, though, is that once you're ready to lead a team of people, stop working solo. I mean, really, just having a single person helping you out doing an equal amount of work will double your productivity. If you've got 5 extra people helping out, then that year-long project is only going to take 2 months. The trick is finding people, and to that end, your best bet are friends. If you've got a friend who's good at drawing, see if they're willing to draw artwork for your game. If you got a friend who happens to be very good at composing music, well, there's someone who can help add some real individuality to your game, rather than having to use freely licensed music. While there's something to be said about people who can make a game solo, expect long, arduous days of game creation that typically don't go anywhere, when you spend 10 hours straight trying to keep your game from crashing the computer when you alt tab. Yeah, stuff like that really does happen. Ultimately, though, you'll probably do really basic and simple things for about a year or so, before moving on to more interesting projects, getting more and more experience as you progress. And sooner or later, be it a couple or several more years further in, you're going to come up with something really good, and you're going to suddenly realize, I would pay money for this. When that realization hits, it's going to throw 2 entirely new aspects into your game design efforts: marketing and troubleshooting. Something I've said a couple times now in regards to games is that money changes everything. One of the first things you're going to have to worry about is marketing your game, since if nobody knows about your game, nobody's going to play it and nobody's going to buy it. So there's a couple things you're going to need to do. The first is the press release. Press releases are basically news articles that come straight from the person or company that's making the news, but instead of being directed towards consumers, they're directed towards the press, who can then decide whether or not to take that news and publish it in their own publications, such as news feeds, magazines, newspapers, etc. I'm not going to go into the intricacies of writing a press release, especially since it's not something you're going to have to do very often, but the moment you're ready to sell something, you need to learn how to do this. The second thing you're going to need to do is take advantage of every single presence you have on the internet and get people in the know. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky, since most places aren't going to be receptive to someone just barging in and pushing their stuff. If you want to talk about something you've made or are in the process of making, you need to be respected to some degree. So even before your game is finished, it's important to make a presence for yourself. A good way to do this is to get involved in various forums and join their conversations with your own insights. That way, when you're ready to talk about your own stuff, you can relate to it in the conversations people have without flat out advertising it. And could even post threads about your own stuff asking for feedback and opinions, since people know who you are now and are willing to learn more about what you do. And don't be afraid to get some negative feedback either, because trust me, there's always someone who hates a particular game no matter how good it is. One game I personally don't like that numerous DOS gamers do is Raptor Call of the Shadows, just to give you guys an example. And yeah, the other thing that changes is troubleshooting, because when someone has technical problems with a game that's free, well, there's not really much they can do about it if you don't have the answers and don't know how to solve their problem. However, if someone paid money for your game and they end up in a situation where they can't play it when by all logic they should be able to, that's never a good thing. Now you're going to be faced with the solve it or give me my money back situation, not helped by some of the bad apples who'll buy your game and then make some highly dubious claim about why they want their money back. So yeah, when you're ready to sell your games, you'd better be prepared to investigate and fix any bugs people encounter. Otherwise, your customers aren't going to come back when you make more stuff. A good way to ensure that people don't waste their money if your game isn't going to work for them for whatever reason, as well as to give players an idea of what they're paying for, is to create a free demonstration version of your software that people can play without having to pay for it first. There's a number of different ways to go about doing this, but I find there's two things you can do to encourage people to buy your game from within your demonstration version. The first is to only give players about 1 or 2 hours worth of natural gameplay, as in make it so that the amount of content takes about 1 to 2 hours to play through. If you give them too much, they won't see the need to pay for the full game. If you give them too little, they won't get a good impression of how much they like your stuff and will likely just move on to other games. And if you forcibly time limit your game, people will get frustrated that they're being arbitrarily stopped from playing your game, and out of spite, will just find ways around your time limiter. The other thing you want to do is only have one nag screen and don't show it until the person's done playing. You also want to make sure that this nag screen shows off some of the features present in the full game and also has a button so that players can purchase the game in a heartbeat, because the more difficult it is for someone to buy your game, the less likely they'll be to complete the process. And yeah, that's basically everything you need to know if you want to get into game design. But yeah, seriously. I know some of you are expecting me to give recommendations on programming languages, graphics software, audio software, but really, that's something you want to look into yourself. I can tell you what programs I use, but they won't necessarily be programs you want to use. So it's very important to do your own research and to try different programs out for yourself to see what you like working with the best. Beyond that, game creation is just a process, with marketing your game being just as important, if not more so, than actually creating it. But ultimately, you need to make games that you yourself would want to play. Making a game just because you think it would be popular is setting yourself up for disaster. You need to have fun making a game, because if you're not having fun making the game, it's going to show in the final product, and people just won't have that much fun playing it. It's just another reason why it's so important to just tinker around with game creation software and come up with small random projects to build up your experience and to build up your confidence towards making more interesting things. So, after all of this, do you still want to get into game design? If the answer is yes, then go grab yourself some game creation software and start tinkering, because the road ahead of you is very long and very rocky, and there's no time like the present.